Now, the A7 IV is not a perfect camera at all, and has got its cons, but it's also got its pros. And let's get into this, and I'll just show you what it looks like. This is the sneak preview. So earlier last year, I've been thinking about purchasing the new camera that Sony had announced, which was the A7 IV. Previous to that, there was the A7S3, which I thought had not enough megapixels for shooting stills, but yet it was actually very capable video. Now, how would that be if there would be a camera that had everything what the A7S3 has got, then also have a larger sensor size? Sony did think about that, and they brought out the A7 IV. I received this camera in September 2021, and I can probably talk with you about the long-term usage of this camera and what the pros and what the cons are. So let's get into the dirty nitty-gritties of it. So first up, I need to say that to me, the camera I use is a part of the whole production. So which means also that there's a lot of other bits and pieces that are needed to complete the whole setup. The parts I choose, such as lighting, lenses, the look of the talent, collaboration, artistic flair, and so on, also have a huge influence on the outcome of the final image. Maybe by now you will realize also that the camera body alone is not everything that you need to consider. The right camera requires more than just a coincidental grab off the camera shelf in the store. So when you look at the polar opposites of camera usage, there are different requirements for each and every person. Some photographers have embraced film photography, and it is another genre. You will end up with digital complications, so that is something that you need to take into consideration. So there's going to be film transfer from film onto digital, which brings it back into a digital world. So, you know, there's something to be said about that. Now, others have gone deeply into like finding the limits of hybrid photography and digital photography, such as mirrorless. And Sony has been on the forefront developing mirrorless cameras, and now Canon and Nikon as well have followed, such as also Fuji, Olympus, etc., etc. So there's been a lot of development in the mirrorless systems. Our photography is, let me say, a transparent reflection of time, place, knowledge, and so on. Tools will come and go, and so will also the camera body, and in time you will also find that the camera body itself needs replacing, and I've come to this point. I personally see the ownership of a camera like every other tool. It comes with a graphic curve. Let's say the curve on a good device begins its life at the bottom of the curve. Now, it will sharply rise as everyone becomes jubilant. There's been an announcement about this camera. Everything gets shown, you know, it's a beautiful, nice and shiny camera, and so on, and you can't wait to get it into your hands. Now, you finally get it in your hands, you pull it out of a box, and there it is. So the curve is right up there. It's probably about at its peak. Now, you will find some bits and pieces, yes, there are some extra bits and pieces that you will find as you go along, and you will be more jubilant, and the curve goes a notch up. Yes. Now there comes a time once you pendled in things, the curve levels out, and you will be enjoying the camera if it's a good camera, and you'll be sort of like quite happy with it, you know, no problems at all. Now, come over the years, the curve starts going down. You're seeing new products coming out. There's new people talking about new cameras, and so on and so on. And obviously, there comes a point when this camera is probably just not up to snuff anymore. There's better stuff out there. So the curve goes right down rock bottom. And when it hits rock bottom, obviously that's when the time comes that you purchase, or you think about purchasing, a new camera. So for a while now, I was thinking about actually doing a long-term review about this camera, and I spoke with a lot of people about what they thought about the camera, what other people thought about the A1, the A7S3. I handled both cameras, and in comparison to the A7 IV, there were some bits and pieces that I liked about the other cameras, but there were also some other bits and pieces that I didn't like about those cameras, and that I appreciated that this camera had. Now, this was the replacement for my A7R4. So why do you think I swapped it out? Well, I swapped it out for the video-centric side, really, to be honest. Now, the video-centric side has now given me 4K 60, although it's in crop and everyone knows about this. So you got the full-size HDMI output, which is fantastic. I have never really wanted a HDMI output. When I started doing video work, all of a sudden it really came true that that is something that I really needed for my shows, and also for video recording like what I'm doing here right now. The flip screen on this camera is just fantastic, and as you can see, it just flips right around, and the top-down work that you can do with this is quite good, and it's a great design for me. You don't have to use it if you don't like it, so just leave it popped in. Also, just spin it around, and then you've got a protected side, and nothing will get to it. So as I mentioned previously, I was very interested in the A7S when it appeared. The 12 megapixel was there, yes, I understand, but I wanted something video centric, so I was really looking into that, and it gave me everything that this camera has got. It's got the flip out screen, etc, etc. It lacked the image flexibility in cropping, and I was also painfully aware of the extra cost of that camera. The going prices on between the Sony A7 III and the A7 IV is very considerable, so it's just another point to the A7 IV. So let's have a look and see what the A7 IV has got that really makes it shine. I will tell you on a very simplified, non-technical side of what you can expect out of this camera, and I will be very truthful. I have not been given any money to review this camera. This is purchased out of my own money, and I don't have any affiliation with any company whatsoever, even though I'm a Sony shooter and I'm dedicated to using Sony lenses and Sony camera bodies. Now, the real importance is whether this camera delivers what I want out of it. If, for instance, the curve stays steady for a very long time and there are a few little downward spikes, then that's the camera that I want for video work and for photography as well. As you might already know from other reviewers, this camera has got a 33 megapixel sensor built in, and it's stabilized, so you will get amazing images from it. Unfortunately, the sensor is not a dual stacked sensor, and therefore Sony has done away with one single chipset and has installed a dual chipset in here that compensates for it. We are done away with color science these days because of what Capture One, for instance, has done. I'm a Capture One editor, so I do Capture One work, and the colors are fantastic straight out of the camera. Now, the camera will shoot 10 frames a second, given that's not really a very high standard in today's world where cameras can do, 30, 60 frames a second, 120 frames a second. I don't really worry too much about it. I used to have an A9 camera which shoots 20 frames a second, and I used to shift it down to mid position where it just shoots maybe 10 frames a second because it was just not really my way of shooting. Spray and pray has never been what I actually do. 10 frames is also very good and amberly enough to capture bird in flight. However, if you have got a higher need for a much more spec'd out camera that does wildlife really well and sports really well, then perhaps you might want to look at the A1. There are some problems about in comparison to this camera about the pricing. When you look at what the A1 costs, you can almost buy 2 of these cameras, so that's another little thought that I have. Incidentally, the battery grip is exactly the same as what you would be using for the A1 and the A7 IV and the A9 II. So all these cameras, including the A7 IV, have got the same battery grip. Now, the focus is just as snappy as what you would be expecting from a high-end hybrid camera. The speed of focusing is probably just on par with the A1 and the A9 II, and there are no real big problems with the focus accuracy. This has also been slightly improved by the firmware update that has just recently come out for this camera, which is version 1.01. So in my testing, I found that the camera will focus much faster on the eye nowadays when you actually turn the camera on for the first time. It will straight away snap into the eye autofocus rather than showing you the green box grid that you usually get at startup. So even the eye autofocus is working really great. It can still be confused by branches, by elements that are almost, well, the camera will maybe pick that up as an eye and think it's an eye instead of the real eye, and then it will go and focus on that. This is a common thing, and it's very hard to solve, and there are a lot of other manufacturers that are experiencing the same problem. So this is the current tech that we are in, and of course, you know, through time and experience and learning curves, newer cameras will do a better job, and also firmware upgrades may give us the solution here. Now, the cache and transfer speeds are very good on this camera, and I could not actually really get this camera to really choke on anything. And also, you can still go into the menu system, you can still crop in, you can do all sorts of things to use the camera, so you're not being locked out anymore like you used to be in the older version cameras like the A9 or like the A7 R4 and the R3, etc. So what are the cons on this camera? Well, there are a few gripes, and they've been inherited from the previous version cameras, and some have snuck in as well over time. So let's go and have a look at this. So the first con on this camera is the LCD. Now, as I said, the LCD flip screen is a great idea and I love it. However, the resolution on this LCD is lacking the quality of other manufacturers. I would recommend a higher LCD in the future rollouts. However, I do understand that this will come as a penalty for the battery. Obviously, if you've got more powerful panels and more quality panels that actually show you a better picture, you will also lose battery life. Now, the other problem with the LCD screen that actually flips out, you cannot flip it up in the resting position. What I'm talking about is the flip it out sideways. You can't flip it upwards so you can actually see the screen when you want to look down. You will have to flip it out, you'll have to turn it, and then you can do that and actually look down. So this makes the LCD screen more vulnerable on being on the side. For when you drop it, it could actually break maybe, but apart from that, once you get used to it, it's fine. So the other gripe is, of course, that the camera does not come with an external charger. Like, I quite don't understand why the cost couldn't be compensated in such price hike of a camera. Of course, the price went up because of the higher sensor, higher tech that's in the camera. The body is a different ergonomic, and of course, in a pinch, you can charge up the camera via the USB-C port that I show you here, the battery grip, if you have got one, to charge two batteries at the same time. So there's a little trick. If you go on holidays, take a battery grip with you, charge up two batteries at the same time overnight. So the dual ISO on this camera now is at 400 ISO. This is just sheer physics. On the A7 it's 640 ISO. With the A7R4, for instance, it is 320 ISO. And it's just because of the sensor pixel size. However, the low light performance on this camera is stellar and almost matches that of the A7S III. Very, very good competitor. Now, as I mentioned, the LCD is acceptable, and so is the EVF, but however, there is always room for improvement. The better EVF has been left in the Sony A7Iv or the Sony A1. This could have been inherited into this camera as well. It's just unfortunate that a lot of things were, you know, price cut, should I say. A lot of people have been complaining also about the switch on the back where you have got the selection of stills, video or S&Q. However, I think it's a bonus, although I put this down as a con as well, because the setup time to really get this camera set up correctly will take much longer than you have been setting up the previous cameras. So when you look at the top dial, I've got the memory 1 set up for video and for camera the way I like it to be. So once I start shooting, I've got it in memory 1, and all I need to do then is just switch it over from video to stills, stills to video, and it will always be in the correct mode that I want it to be in. For video, stills, etc., you can still unify all that, and then you've got it set up exactly the same as what you would have had in the A7 III. Now, my biggest gripe here is also, and it's a huge con to me, is the lugs. Now, the shoulder strap lugs that come with a sprung ring, and I've taken them off now, but you still are left with the prongs that are sticking out and the holes. Now, the biggest problem is that your hand will always be in that position where you will always be pointing into, and it's always annoying, especially on the grip, that this has not been remedied. And it's an old system, and it really needs to be revamped. Manufacturers that have done something about it are Canon and also Olympus. Now, Olympus have moved the lug to the upper position, which basically clears that hand away. Now, for some strange reason, you can see there's actually a roll pin which is on the battery grip. Do not understand why it is possible to have that and have these silly lugs up here. I understand maybe in the internal of the camera there's just no room to be able to do that. However, a redesign and reshuffle should be able to fix that in a hurry. Also, having a lug in this position on the non-grip side prevents me from turning the camera and sitting it on the ground and having a horizontal line. It will be actually on a tilt, which is a huge problem at times, because I sometimes just do street photography. I want to sit the camera down and take an image, and it's just not possible with the lug. Another con is the eye-cup relief rubber. Now, the rubber has not changed since the earlier manufacturing of these camera bodies, and the material is still a soft rubber, which is good for a while. And then after body oils, etc., get into this rubber, it seems to get loose and it will just start popping off. So when you pull the camera out of the bag, all of a sudden it has got the rubber, you know, like not sitting in properly, and then you've got to spend time actually redoing it all. The actual fitment of the eye-cup rubber is pretty good, and it comes off. It's stuck in there very strongly, so that is not a problem anymore. However, the actual fitment of the hard plastic to the rubber should be reviewed. So the color menu that comes in this camera is still confusing. It has been updated, improved. However, I still have got gripes about it, and it's still sometimes very confusing for me to find certain items in there, and I still don't understand why Sony has not really made it possible to really have functionality in menus such as, again, Canon or Nikon. For every con, there's also a positive, and once you have set up your camera, your menu becomes less and less. It will fall aside. You will use the menu less and less. And besides, you have the My Menu system that actually this comes with, and also you have got a modifiable FN or a function set. What has gone missing is the NFC. Now, NFC is a close contact to transfer pictures over to your smartphone, etc. Now, this function, I never used it personally. I know some people were using it. However, I've got to make you aware of that is not in this camera anymore, like what it was in the A7 III. One of my other biggest problems is with this camera that it has not got a audio sound for the shutter in electronic setting. Now, this means that it has a silent electronic shutter, and it will show you in the screen that you will be able to see that it's actually taking pictures if you've got that set in the menu. The problem with that is that the audio signals are not there, and you'll be still left wondering whether or not the pictures were taken. Cameras such as the A1 and the A9 and the A9 II have got electronic sound for the audio shutter. Now this is another thing that I cannot understand why Sony has done this, and they omitted the audio sound. There is a speaker on the side, and it has got audio sounds for all sorts of other bits and pieces, but not for the shutter. There is also still the old electronic shake mode for cleaning the sensor. Now this is very insufficient, and it usually doesn't really clean up the sensor at all, and you still have to do a sensor clean. The A1 has got a sonic cleaning system that actually does a much better job than this camera does. I, again, would have liked to have seen that on this camera. I would like to know whether or not the mechanical shutter is a different shutter to what the A7 III was. I have not found any talk about it, no schematics, no nothing, and I would like to see in the comment box whether or not someone actually knows something about this. I just cannot find it, and there has been some problems about the mechanical shutter with the A7 III in the past. I do not know, and I've got no answer. As you may or may not be aware, these cameras here in Australia have got a 2-year warranty from Sony, so have the lenses as well. I think in America it is only 1 year. However, this falls flat and very short from a 5-year warranty that Canon gives, so I cannot understand why the warranty is not extended to 5 years. At least it will give me peace of mind that when I've got a shutter failure, or mechanical shutter failure, then that would be coming under the warranty within 5 years. However, that can be compensated again by having a good insurance on your camera gear, which you should have, and that might probably cover the failure of a shutter. And yes, of course, as I said before, the camera, the video mode, will crop in at 4K 60. Now that is not usually a big problem to me, as I do a lot of wildlife photography nowadays with video, and every help is good, so I probably would have cropped either way. In crop mode, you still get 4K 60, which is downsampled from 7K, which is amazing. The image quality is great. Now I should mention that there's been a lot of talk about overheating of this camera, and I have not experienced that. I have run this camera at up to 1 hour and a half on 4K 60, and yes, the back gets warm. You need to flip out the screen when you record, and a lot of people know about this by now. A dummy battery or even a battery grip would help. Holding the camera for prolonged periods while you're filming is a problem as well, because you are warming up the camera just by holding it. Keeping it outside in warmer temperatures will cause overheating. Of course, in the menu system, go to your settings, put the temperature on high, which will also help preventing this from happening. I have not had any problems with recording and overheating on this camera. However, you may experience it. Go as far as opening up the card door and let some heat expel out of here as well. That will help. So what are the actual pros about this camera, and why did I choose to actually get it? Now, in comparison to the earlier model cameras, which is the A7 III, the A9, A7R III, the ergonomics have changed and they've been updated, so you got a much better grip. It's deeper. The overall camera size is a little bit larger, and the buttons are also very improved, and you've got better control. So whether you are traveling or you need, in some other reference, a reduced sized camera, this camera body can do it. So you can see this has actually got the battery grip inbuilt. Once you start taking it off, it becomes a much smaller form factor and much more usable for traveling, etc. So you can just leave the grip at home and you've got a very much smaller camera size. So as per previous camera versions like the A7 III and the A9, the battery size remains the same. So you can comfortably reuse and repurpose your Sony Z batteries, and that is a really good idea, because it saves the environment. You don't have to throw your batteries out. You can repurpose these batteries, which is a really good idea, and I'll give Sony a tick for that. The A7 IV inherits the same sealing as what you will find in the A7S3, the A7R4, and the A1, as well as the A9 II. So the sealing is very good, and there shouldn't be any problems when you are out in rain. Now, the weatherproofing has been proven during the Olympics when people or photographers were using the A1, etc. So there were never any problems reported about weather sealing and whether or not these cameras can shoot in extreme conditions. The newly designed hot shoe from Sony has also been brought over into this camera, and you will be able to dock your digital microphone into the hot shoe without using a cable. I still use Rode microphones that actually require a socket, so that is also included here on this camera. Now, the doors have got a much better hinge design. However, there's always a better design that Sony could look into, which are doors that are removable, like the DJI GoPro line of action cameras. The doors, if they could be removable, then that would be a good idea. Now, the A7 IV has also got very good IAF, but it also has animal IAF and bird IAF. Not only does it have bird IAF, it also has bird IAF in video mode, which is one of the only cameras that Sony has currently that can do that. So I'm hoping very much that there will be an update for the A1 camera at least, so that all these actual good parts of this camera will rattle down in the firmware to the users from these cameras. So a lot of people actually have mentioned that the flip screen is not something that they want, and they are okay with the A1, etc. I, however, do like this, and it's great for portrait photography when you're actually doing overhead shooting with the camera. You can flip the screen out, and then you can basically shoot in this mode. Again, if you are concerned about the flip screen, just leave it tucked in and you'll be fine. Flip screen is built fairly solid for its design. I don't think it can be built any stronger right now with the current technology that everyone has got. So with care, it won't be a problem. So as I already brought up, there's a USB-C. Now this USB-C is a much faster USB throughput, and also with that comes another great function of this camera. It can be used as a webcam. You can connect it to your computer, and it will act as a really good webcam. Gone are the days where the previous models could be used as a webcam, but they also were staggering along, and the frame rate was somewhere around 12 frames a second, which is just not very good looking in comparison to a normal standard webcam. So you have got that option now. So there's another cost saving in a way. Instead of buying a webcam, you can just buy yourself this camera, and you've got two in one. And of course, when we're talking about customization, Sony is king. There are not many cameras where you can do such customization as what you can do with this camera. And now you can also customize individually the video and also camera settings, stills. Of course, there are even more points, like you can actually fix the actual compensation dial and turn that into any other customization you like. And did you also know that the rubbish bin button is another customizable button, which is the C4 button, and that can actually be used very much. I use that for something like APS-C, for instance. Seeing that you've come so far, you probably also want to know what I personally think about this camera. Of course, there are a lot of cons that are rattled down, and I would like Sony to actually do something about certain design flaws that they can do and implement in newer cameras and also via firmware. The camera overall is a great hybrid camera. I would highly recommend this camera to people that are into wedding photography, that want to use this as a wildlife camera, but have got other needs for this camera, such as video, etc., etc. So it's a good all-rounder. It will not do bird in flight perfectly, but it will actually do bird in flight. Of course, if you are a YouTuber and a vlogger and you want to do other photography as well, like journalistic photography, you name it, this camera can be a great all-rounder and will actually do it all for you, etc. 33 megapixel sensors are, of course, basically the best sensor that you could actually really think of. It is not a huge file size. It is still giving you croppability. So it's just a happy medium camera for me. So if I was in the market to either purchase this or an A1 camera, why did I decide to buy this camera over an A1? It is quite clear, it's the cost. You can have a BTS camera as a secondary camera as well, with the same button functions, etc. And you'll be happy for 90% or 95% of the time. For studio, fashion and portrait photography, this camera is probably the ants pants. I mean, it gives you the amazing eye autofocus. It gives you 33 megapixels. It will shoot happily all day long, and to boot, you can record BTS footage in 4K 60. So I found even in wildlife photography and landscape photography, this camera will give you nice deep blacks. The tonal range is really good. So if you are a raw shooter, you are looking for a great camera that you can use for landscape photography, etc. There are, of course, other sensors out there like the R4 and with its 61 megapixels, and of course the 51 megapixel on the A1. However, this at this price range is a great performer. Again, I should mention that the downsampling from 7K to 4K is just excellent, and I would not say that this is a full production camera where you can do everything. Of course, there are much more professional video cameras out there that will actually do that kind of work, starting with the something like, say, an FX6, for instance. However, this is much more bulky, it's more video-centric, and will make more sense for the videographer that is actually doing professional work, of course. Having human IAF, which we are fairly accustomed to in the other camera bodies of the Sony ranges, and also Canon and Nikon and Olympus, etc. They're all stellar in doing that nowadays. But also we have now got animal and bird IAF. And not only do we have bird IAF in stills, we've got bird IAF in video. Now, I'm not trying to rub this in to other bodies that cost a lot more. It is just fact that this camera has got it, and it should be implemented in firmwares for other camera bodies. So the Sony A7 IV will give you much room for improving your photography work, and also will go a little bit further if you want to. Now, it will not give you 8K, as we know. It won't give you 4K 120 like the A7S III can. However, I'm still happy with what I'm getting out of this camera for its price. Now, all being said, this is of course your choice that you will be making at one stage or another down the track, or might be sitting on the fence and you're waiting for another version of some other camera to come out. I'm not telling you to go out today and buy yourself another camera or anything at all. This is all your money, and you need to choose what will work in the future or currently. This video was not meant to get you to jump and ordering a camera like this. This was just meant to clarify certain points about this camera that might have not been clear to you. Now, the other thing is also, if you already have, say, a Sony A1 and you are doing professional work, of course you'll need a B-roll camera, like a backup camera. Then I could highly recommend that you maybe should be looking at the A7 IV before any other camera. There is, of course, more to this camera. An excellent focus map in video, the optical zoom that you can do. Focus breathing fix is now implemented in certain lenses for this camera. Video codecs like 4.22 in 10-bit, Intra, Cine S, Log, etc. are all supported with this camera now. All these functions are very good features for a camera in this price range, and you'll be very happy with what you'll be able to achieve. You might ask yourself which lenses would be good on a camera like this. Now, I shoot extensively with the 200 to 600 G lens. I also own the Sigma 150 to 600 DGDN sports lens, which works really well with this camera. Also, if you are thinking about the teleconverter with the 200 to 600 lens, that is not a problem. It works really well. There are, of course, the usual caveats where you shoot at f8. However, this is also good because you have got a high ISO that you can use. Now, I shoot this mostly in electronic shutter or silent shutter, and a lot of people have been saying that you will get distortion, etc., happening with this camera. But if you know what you're doing, you can shoot this happily in electronic shutter all the time, apart from, of course, flash. Now, should I mention again that I'm not receiving any money for this review, and I don't get any contributions. I have to foot the costing of this camera out of my own pocket, so nothing comes from any manufacturer. I hope this has been helpful in you perhaps choosing your next camera. So in the end, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up and share, and also give us the bell button so you can be reminded of our next videos and upcoming shows. Apart from that, I hope all this has helped you, and yeah, get yourself one of these and try it out at least, you know, and be pleasantly surprised. So for now, I wish you all the best, and have a happy weekend and happy week, and until I do another video, ciao.